Om Brahmanandam Paramasubhadam Kevalam Jnanamurtim Dandvatitam Gagan Sudrasham Tattvamasyaadilakshayam Ekam Nityam Vimlamachalam Sarvadhi Sakshibhutam Bhavadeetam Trigunarahitam Sadgurum Tam Namah. So friends, today we will take up chapter 32 onwards of Upasna Khand. And in this chapter, Prahlad and Daitya demons worship Vishnu and the gods complain. Vashiji continued. After Prahlad had meditated on Vishnu in this manner, he made an image of him as Narayan and thought about worshipping that enemy of the Asura demon race. To make the figure of a form of Vishnu himself, he invoked the spirit of Vishnu to settle in this his outer figure also. It was seated on the back of the heavenly bird Garud, arrayed with the quadruple attributes, and armed with four arms holding the conch shell, discus, club, and lotus. His two eyeballs flashed like the orbs of the sun and moon in their outstretched sockets. His palms were as red as lotuses, and his bow Sarang and the sword Nandak hung on his two shoulders and sides. I will worship this image, thought Prahlad, with all my adherents and dependents, with an abundance of grateful offerings agreeable to my taste. I will worship this great God, always with all kinds of offering of precious gems and jewels, and all sorts of articles for bodily use and enjoyment. Having thus made up his mind, Prahlad collected the abundance of various things and made offerings of them in his mind for his worship of Vishnu, the Lord of Lakshmi. He offered rich gems and jewels in plates of many kinds and presented sandal pates in several pots. He burned incense and lit lamps in rows and placed many valuables and ornaments in sacred vessels. He presented wreaths of mandara flowers and chains of lotuses made of gold, together with garlands of leaves and flowers of kalp plants, and bouquet and nosegays studded with gems and pearls. He hung hangings of leaves and leaflets of heavenly trees, and chaplets and trimmings of various kinds of flowers, as vakas and kundas, kinkirtas, and white, blue, and red lotuses. There were wreaths of kallar, kunda, kas, kinsuk flowers, and clusters of asok, mandana, bella, and kanikra blossoms likewise. There were small flowers of the kadamb, vakal, nimb, sindhurv, sindhuvar, and utikas also, and likewise heaps of paribhadra, guguli, and venduka flowers. There were strings of priyangu, patala, pata, and patala flowers, and also blossoms of amra, amartaka, gavyas, and the bulbs of haritki and vibhitki myrabolans. Flowers of sala and tamara trees were strung together with their leaves, and tender buds of shakars were fastened together with their starch-like pistils. There were ketkas and kamala flowers and the shoots of ela cardamums, together with everything beautiful to sight and the tender of one's soul likewise. Thus did Prahlad worship his Lord Vishnu in this manner, apartment of his house, with offerings of all the richest things in the world, joined with true faith and earnestness of his mind and spirit. Thus did the monarch of the demons worship his Lord Vishnu externally in his holy temple, furnished with all kinds of valuable things on earth. The Danav sovereign became more and more gratified in his spirit in proportion as he adored his God with more and more of his valuable outer offerings. Henceforth, Prahlad continued to worship in his Lord God day after day with earnestness and of his soul and same sort of rich offerings every day. It came to pass that the Daityas, after the example of their king, one and all turned Vaishnavas and worshipped Vishnu in their city and temples without intermission. This information reached heaven and to the abode of gods that the Daityas have renounced their hatred to Vishnu and had completely turned into his faithful believers and worshippers. The gods were all astonished to learn that the Daityas had accepted the Vaishnava faith. Even Indra and the 33 Rudras were about him marveled how the Daityas come to be so. The astonished gods left their celestial abode to go to the work like Vishnu, resting on his serpent couch in the milky ocean. They related to him the whole story of the Daityas demons. They asked what was the cause of their conversion, and they were very much astonished. The gods said, how is it, Lord, that the demons who had always been averse to you have now come to embrace your faith? It appears to us an act of magic or hypocrisy. How different is their present transformation to Vaishnava faith, which is acquired only after many reincarnations of the soul, from their former spirit of rebellion in which they broke down those rocks and mountains. The rumor that a clown has become a learned man is as amusing as it is doubtful, just as the news of blossoms budding out of season. Nothing is graceful without its proper place. A rich jewel loses its value when it's set with worthless pebbles. All animals have their dispositions conforming to their own natures. Then how can the pure faith of Vishnu agree with the dog-like natures of Daityas? Our bodies pierced by thorns and needles do not grieve us as much as seeing things of opposite natures set in conjunction with one another. Whatever is naturally adapted to its time and place, the same seems to suit it then and there. Therefore, the lotus has its grace in water and not upon the land. Where are the wild Daityas prone to their misdeeds at all the times? How far can the Vaishnava faith reach for those who can never appreciate its merit? O Lord, as we are never glad of a learn of a lotus bed left to parch in the desert soil, so we can never rejoice at the thought that the race of demons will place their faith in Vishnu, the Lord of gods. With this chapter 32 comes to an end, and in the next chapter 33, Vishnu explains Prahlad to the gods, appears to Prahlad. Vasishtha said, the Lord of Lakshmi, seeing the gods clamoring in their accusation of demons, gave his words to them in sounds as sonorous as those of rainy clouds responding to the lotus noise of screaming and thirst-stricken peacock. The Lord Vishnu said, you gods don't marvel at Prahlad's faith in me, as it is because of his virtuous acts in past life that this pious prince is entitled to his final liberation in this his present life. He shall not have to be born again in the womb of a woman or be reproduced in any form on earth, but must remain aloof from regeneration, like a friend pea which doesn't germinate anymore. A virtuous man turning impious becomes the source of evil, but an unworthy man becoming meritorious is doubtless a step towards his better being and blessedness. You good gods who are quite happy in your blessed seats in heaven must not let the good deserts of Prahlad be any cause of your uneasiness. And Vashiji resumed. The Lord, having thus spoken to the gods, became invisible to them like a feather floating on the surface of waves. The assembly of immortals then returned to their heavenly abodes after taking their leaves of the god, just as the particles of sea water are carried to the sky by the soft warm breezes or by the agitation of Mandara mountain. Henceforth the gods were pacified towards Prahlad because the mind is never suspicious of one who has the credit of its superiors. Prahlad also continued his daily adoration of his god with the contriteness of his heart and in the formulas of his spiritual, oral, and bodily services. It was in this course of his divine service in this manner that he attained the joy proceeding from his right discrimination, self resignation, and other virtues with which he was crowned. He took no delight in any object of enjoyment, nor felt any pleasure in the society of his consorts, all which he shunned as a male deer shuns a withered tree and the company of human beings. He didn't walk in the ways of the ungodly or spend his time in anything but religious discourses. His mind didn't dwell on visible objects like the lotus that never grows on dry land. His mind did not delight in pleasures which were all linked with pain, but longed for its liberation, which is as entire of itself and unconnected with anything as a single grain of unperforated pearl. His mind was abstracted from his enjoyments, but not yet settled in its samadhi of ultimate rest. He was wavering between the two states like a cradle swinging both ways. The god Vishnu, who knew all things by his all knowing intelligence, saw the unsettled state of Prahlad's mind from his seat in the Milky Ocean. Pleased at Prahlad's firm belief, he proceeded by an underground route to the place of his worship and manifested before him at the holy altar. Seeing his god manifest to his view, the lord of the demons worshipped him with twofold veneration and made many respectful offerings to his lotus eyed deity, more than his usual practice. He then gladly glorified his God with many prayers in gratitude for appearing before him in his house of worship. Prahlad said, I adore you, O my Lord, who is unborn and without decay, who is the blessed receptacle of the three worlds, who dispels all darkness by the light of your body, and who is the refuge of the helpless and friendless. I adore my Vishnu in his complexion of blue lotus leaves and the color of autumn. I worship him whose body is of the color of the dark Brahmara bee and who holds the lotus discus club and conch shell in his arms. I worship the god who dwells in the lotus like hearts of his devotees with his appearance of a swarm of dark bees, who holds a conch shell as white as the bud of a lotus or lily, with earrings ringing in his ears with the music of humming bees. I resort to Vishnu's sky blue shade, shining with the starry light of his long stretching nails, his face shining like the full moon with his smiling beams, and his breast waving like the surface of Ganges with the sparkling gems hanging upon it. I rely on that deity who slept on the leaf of a fig tree, who contains the universe in himself, in his stupendous form of Viras, who is neither born nor grown, but is always with the whole by himself, and who is possessed of endless attributes of his own nature. I take my refuge in Vishnu, whose bosom is daubed with the red dust of the new blown lotus, and whose left side is adorned by the blushing beauty of Lakshmi, whose body is covered by a red colored cloth and smeared with red sandal paste like liquid gold. I take my refuge under that Vishnu, who is the destructive frost to the lotus bed of demons, who is the rising sun to the opening buds of the lotus bed of the deities, who is the source of the lotus born Brahma, and who is the receptacle of the lotus petal seat of our understanding. My hope is in Vishnu, the blooming lotus of the bed of the triple world, and the only light amidst the darkness of the universe, who is the principle of consciousness amidst the gross material world, and who is the only remedy for all the evils and troubles of this transient life. Vashishji continued, Vishnu, the destroyer of demons, who is graced on his side by the goddess of prosperity, being praised with many such graceful speeches of the demon lord, answered him as lovingly in his blue lotus like form as when the deep clouds responds to the peacock's scream. And what he said is will be described in the next chapter 34. Prahlad's discrimination leads to self-realization. This is important. The Lord said, O you rich jewel on the crown of the Daitya race, receive your desired reward of me to alleviate your worldly afflictions. Prahlad replied, what better blessing can I ask of you, my Lord, than to instruct me in what you think is your best gift above all other treasures of the world, and which is able to benefit and reward all our wants in this miserable life. The Lord answered, May you have a sinless boy, and may your right discrimination of things lead you to your rest in God and the attainment of your supreme joy after the dispersion of your earthly cares and errors of this world. Vashiji continued. Being thus bid by his God, the Lord of Demons fell into a profound meditation, his nostrils snoring loudly like the gurgling waters of the deep. As Lord Vishnu departed from his side, the chief of demons made his oblations after him, consisting of handfuls of flowers and rich gems and jewels of various kinds. Then, seated in lotus posture, legs folded over one another, upon his elevated and elegant seat, he chanted his holy hymn and reflected within himself. Prahlad's contemplation. My deliverer from this sinful world has asked me to have my discrimination. Therefore, I must discriminate between what is true and false. I must know that I am in this dark world, and I must seek the light of my soul and principle that makes me speak, walk, and take pains to exert myself. I perceive that I am nothing of this external world, like any of its green trees or hills. External bodies are all of a gross nature, but my ego is quite a simple and pure essence. I am not this unconscious body, which is both dull and dumb, and is made to move for a moment by means of the vital ears. The body is is an unreal appearance of a transitory existence. I am not the unconscious sound, which is an empty substance produced in emptiness. It is perceptible through the ear hole and is as fleeting and insubstantial as empty air. Nor am I the unconscious organ of touch or the momentary feeling of touch. I find myself to be an inner principle with the faculty of reasoning and the capacity of knowing the nature of the soul. I am not even my taste, which is confined in the tasting of certain objects and to the organs of taste of the tongue, which is a trifling and ever restless thing, sticking to and moving in the cavity of the mouth. I am not my sight, which is employed in seeing only what is visible. It is weak and decaying, and never lasting in its power, nor capable of viewing the invisible spirit. I am not the power of my smell, which belongs only to my nasal organs, and is conversant with the scented substances for a short moment only. I am pure consciousness, and not any of the sensations of my five external organs of sense. I am neither my mental faculty, which is ever frail and unsteady, nor is there anything belonging to me or participating of my true essence. I am the soul and an indivisible whole. I am pure consciousness without the objects of reasoning. My pure consciousness pervades internally and externally over all things and manifests them into view. I am the whole without its parts, pure without foulness, and everlasting. It is by reasoning that manifests this sport and that panting to me and brings all other objects to my knowledge by its pure light, just like the sun and a lamp show everything to sight. Ah, now I remember the whole truth that I am the immutable and all pervading spirit, shining in the form of consciousness. This essence evolves itself into the various faculties of senses, just as the inner fire unfolds itself into the forms of its flash and flame and its sparks and visible light. This principle also unfolds itself into the forms of the different organs of sense, just as the all diffusive heat of the hot season shows itself in the shape of mirage in sandy desert. Likewise, this element, the spirit, constitutes the substance of all objects, just as it is the light of the lamp which causes various colors of things, as the whiteness or the color of a piece of cloth or any other thing. The spirit is the source of the perception of all living and waking beings, and of everything else in existence. Just as a mirror reflects all outward appearances, so the soul is the reflective organ of all its internal and external phenomena. It is only through this immutable intellectual light that we perceive the heat of the sun, the coldness of the moon, the solidity of a rock, and the fluidity of water. This is the prime cause of every object of our continuous perception in this world. This is the first cause of all things, without having any prior cause of its own. This produces our notions of the continuity of objects that are spread all around us. They all take the name of objects from their objectivity of the soul. It is this formless cause which is the prime cause of all malleable and secondary causes. It is from this that the world has its production, as coldness is the product of cold and the light. The gods Brahma, Vishnu, Shiva, and Indra, who are the causes of the existence of the world, all owe their origin to this prime cause, which has no cause of himself. I hail that Supreme Soul which is impressed in me and is apart from every object of thought of the intellect, and which is self manifest in all things at all times. All beings stand in relation to the modes and modalities of this Supreme Being. They are immersed as properties in that intellectual spirit. Whatever this internal and intelligent soul wills to do, the same is done everywhere. Nothing other than the soul exists in reality anywhere. Whatever is intended to be done by this intellectual power, the same receives a form of its own. Whatever is thought to be undone by the intellect, the same is resolved into nothing from its substantiality. These numberless series of worldly objects are like shadows cast on the immense mirror of emptiness. All these objects increase and decrease in size under the light of the soul, like the shadows of things enlarging and diminishing themselves in sunshine. This internal soul is invisible to all beings except those whose minds are melted down in pity. It is seen by the righteous in the form of the clear sky. This great cause, like a large tree, gives rise to all visible phenomena, like its germ and sprouts. The movements of living beings are like the flittering of bees about this tree. It is this that gives rise to the whole creation, both in its ideal and real and mobile or quiescent forms. Just as a huge rock gives growth to a large forest with its various kinds of big trees and small shrubs. It is not separate from anything existing in the womb of this triple world, but resides alike in the highest gods as in the lowest grassland. It manifests them all to our view. This is one with the ego and the all pervading soul. It is situated as the moving spirit and the unmoving dullness of the whole. The universal soul is beyond the distinction of my, your, or his individual spirit. It is above the limits of time and space, of number and manner, of form or figure, or shape or size. The one intelligent soul, by its own intelligence, is the eye and witness of all visible things. It is represented as having 1,000 eyes and hands and as many feet. This is that supreme ego of myself that wanders about the sky in the body of the shining sun and also wanders in other forms as those of air in the current winds. The sky is the azure body of my Vishnu with its accompaniments of the conch shell, discus club, and the lotus in the cloud, all of which are tokens of prosperity in this world by their blissful reigns. I find myself identical with this god while I am sitting in my lotus posture in this state of samadhi. And when I have attained my perfection in stillness, I am the same with Shiva, the god, with his 3 eyes, his eyeballs rolling like bees on the lotus face of glory. I am in the form of the god Brahma, and I contain the whole creation in me, like a tortoise contracting its limbs in itself. I rule over the world in the form of Indra. As a monk, I command the monastery which has come down to me. I am an Indra when I rule over my domain, and a poor monk when I dwell in my humble cell. I am both male and female. I am both boy and girl. I am old as regards my soul, and I am young with regard to my body, which is born and ever renewed. The ego is the grass and all kinds of plants on earth. It is also the moisture which grows them, like its thought in the ground of consciousness. In the same manner, as herbs grow in holes and wells have moisture, the ego or soul is the core and foundation of all substance. It is for pleasure that this ego stretched out the world like a clever boy who makes dolls of clay in his play. This ego is me who gives existence to all beings, and it is I in whom they live and move about. Being at last forsaken by me, the whole existence dwindles into nothing. Whatever image is impressed in the clear mirror of my intellect, that and nothing else is in real existence, because there is nothing that exists apart from myself. I am the fragrance of flowers, the colors of their leaves. I am the figure of all forms and the perception of everything that can be perceived. Whatever movable or immovable thing is visible in this world, I am its inmost heart without having any of its desires in my heart. As the primary element of moisture is diffused in nature in the form of water, so my spirit is spread over plants and all other things at large in the form of vacuum. I enter inside and everything in the form of consciousness, and I extend in the manner of various sensations of my soul, own will. As butter is contained in milk and moisture is inherent in water, so the power of consciousness is spread in all beings, and so ego is situated inside all things. The world at all times, whether present, past, or future ages, exists in consciousness. The objects of intelligence are all inert and devoid of motion. Like the mineral and vegetables produce productions of earth. I am the all grasping and all powerful form of Brahma, which fills infinite space and is free from any diminution or decrease in shape or size. I am this all pervading and all productive power known as the universal form. I have gained my boundless empire over all worlds without seeking or asking for it, and without subduing it like Indra of old or crushing the gods with my arms. Oh, the extensive Spirit of God, I bow down to that Spirit in my spirit and find myself lost in it as in the vast ocean of this universal deluge. I find no limit to this Spirit as long as I am seated in the enjoyment of my spiritual bliss. I appear to move about like a minute mollusk in the fathomless expanse of the Milky Ocean. This temple of the cosmic egg is too small and constricted for the huge body of my soul. It is impossible for me to be contained in it, just as it is impossible for an elephant to enter into the eye of a needle. My body stretches beyond the region of Brahma. My attributes extend beyond the categories of the various schools of philosophy, and there is no definite limitation given of them to this day. The attributes of a name and body to the unsupported soul are falsehood, and it is false to compress the unlimited soul within the narrow bounds of the body. The attributes of a name and body to the unsupported soul are falsehoods, and it is false to compress the unlimited soul within the narrow bounds of the body. To say this is I and this is another are altogether wrong. What is this body or my want of it, or the state of living or death to me? How foolish and short witted were my forefathers, who, having forsaken this the spiritual domain, wandered as mortal beings in this frail and miserable world. How great is this grand sight of the immensity of Brahma! How mean are these creeping mortals with their high aims and ambition and all their splendors of royalty! My pure intellectual side, filled with joy and accompanied by the ineffable tranquility, surpasses all other sides in the whole world. I bow down to the self situated in all beings, which is the intelligent and intellectual soul, and quite apart from whatever is the object of reasoning. I, who am the unborn and uncreated soul, rule triumphant over this perishing world by my attainment to the state of the great universal spirit, which is the chief object of gain, the supreme good of mortal beings, and which I live to enjoy. I take no delight in my unpleasant earthly dominion, which is full of painful greatness. I won't be, I won't like to lose my everlasting kingdom of good understanding, which is free from trouble and full of perpetual delight. Cursed be the wicked demons who are so sadly ignorant of their souls and resort to their strongholds of woods and hills and ditches for the safety of their bodies, like the insects of those places. Ignorance of the soul leads to the serving the dull ignorant body with articles of food and clothing. This was how our ignorant elders pampered their bodies for no lasting good. What good did my father Hiranyakashipu reap from his prosperity of a few years in this world? What did he acquire worthy of his descent in the line of the great sage Kashyap? He was not tasted the blissfulness of his soul, has enjoyed no true blessing during his long rule of 100 years in this world. He who has gained the ambrosial delight of his spiritual bliss and nothing of the temporary blessing of life has gained something which is ever full in itself and of which there is no end to the end of the world. It is the fool and not the wise who forsakes this infinite joy for the temporary delights of this world. Such a fool resembles the foolish camel which foregoes his fodder of soft leaves in order to browse the prickly thorns of the desert. What man of sense would turn his eyes from such a romantic sight and like to roam in a city burned down to the ground? What wise man is there that would forsake the sweet juice of sugar cane in order to taste the bitterness of neem? I reckon all my forefathers as very great fools for leaving this happy prospect in order to wander in the dangerous paths of their early dominion. Ah, how delightful is the view of flowering gardens, and how unpleasant is the sight of the burning deserts of sand. How very quiet are these intellectual reveries, and how very boisterous are the cravings of our hearts. There is no happiness to be had in this earth that would make us wish for our sovereignty in it. All happiness consists in the peace of the mind, which always concerns us to see. It is the calm, quiet, and unaltered state of the mind that gives us true happiness in all conditions of life and the true kingdom of things in all places and at all times and under every circumstance in life. The virtue of sunlight is to enlighten all objects, and that of moonlight is to fill us with its ambrosial nectar. But the light of Brahma transcends them both by filling the three worlds with its spiritual glory, which is bigger than sunbeams and cooler than moonlight, brighter than sunbeams. The power of Shiva stretches over the fullness of knowledge, and that of Vishnu over victory and prosperity. Fleetness is the character of the mental powers, and force is the property of the wind. Inflammation is the property of fire, and moisture is that of water. Silence is the quality of devotees for success in their tapa, and eloquence is the qualification of learning. It is the nature of aerials to move about in the air and of rocks to remain fixed on the ground. The nature of water is to set deep and run downwards, and that of mountains to stand and rise upwards. Equanimity is the nature of Buddhists, and drunken merrymaking is the liking of the wine drinkers. The spring delights in its flowering, and rainy season exults in the roaring of its clouds. Yaksh demons are full of delusiveness. Celestials are familiar with cold and frost, and those of the torrid zone are habituated to its heat. Thus, many other beings are suited to their respective climates and seasons and are habituated to the very many modes of life and varieties of habits to which they have been accustomed in the past and present lives or times. It is the one uniform and unchangeable consciousness according to its changeable will and velocity that ordains these many forms and changing modifications of powers and things. The same unchanging consciousness presents these hundreds of changing scenes to us, just as the same and unchanging light of the sun shows a thousand varying forms and colors to the sight. The same consciousness sees at a glance all these great multitudes of objects that fill the infinite space on all sides in all the three times of the present, past, and future. The identical pure consciousness knows at once the various states of all things presented in this vast phenomenal world in all the three times that are existent, gone by, and are to come hereafter. At one and the same time, this pure consciousness reflects all things existent in the present, past, and future times. It is full with the forms of all things existing in the infinite space of the universe. Knowing the events of the three times, the seeing the endless phenomena of all worlds present before it, divine consciousness continues full and perfect in itself and at all times. Understanding ever continues the same and unaltered in spite of the great variety of its perceptions of immutable, of innumerable objects of sense and thoughts, such as the different tastes of sweet and sour in honey and neem fruit at the same time. Consciousness, by abandonment of mental desires and knowing the natures of all things by reducing their dualities into unity, is in its state of acuteness. It views them alike with an equal eye, and at the same time, in spite of the varieties of objects and their great difference from others. By viewing all existence as non existent, you get rid of your existing pains and troubles. By seeing all existence in the light of nothingness, you avoid the suffering of existing evils. The intellect, being withdrawn from its view of the events of the three tenses and being freed from the chains of its fleeting thoughts, there remains only a calm tranquility. The soul, being inexpressible in words, proves to be described only in negative terms. There ensues a state of one's perpetual unconsciousness of his soul or self existence. In this state of the soul, it is equal to Brahma, which is either nothing at all or the all of itself. Its absorption in perfect tranquility is called its liberation from all beings. liberation from all feelings. The intellect, weakened by its will, doesn't see the soul in a clear light. As the deceived eye has only a dim and hazy sight of the world, the intellect, weakened by the dirt of its desire and dislike, is impeded in its heavenly flight. Like a bird caught in a snare, they who have fallen into the snare of delusion by their ignorant choice of this or that are like blind birds falling into the net in search of their prey. Entangled in the meshes of desire and confined in the pit of worldliness, our fathers were barred from this unimpeded sight of spiritual light and endless delight. In vain did our forefathers flourish for a few days on the surface of this earth, only to be swept away by a gust of wind, like fluttering flies and gnats into a ditch. If these foolish pursuers of painful worldly pleasures had known the path of truth, they would never have fallen into the dark pit of unsubstantial pursuits. Foolish folks are subject to repeated pains and pleasures by their various choice of things. They follow the fate of short lived worms born to move and die in their own ditches and ponds. He is said to be really alive who lives true to nature and who, by the rising cloud of his knowledge of truth, suppresses his mirage of desires and aversion. The hot and foul fumes of fancy fly far away from the pure light of reason, just as the hazy mist of night is dispersed by the bright beams of moonlight. I hail that soul which dwells as the inseparable consciousness in me. At last I come to know my God that resides like a rich gem, enlightening all the worlds in myself. I have long thought upon and sought after you, and at last I have found you rising in me. I have chosen you from all others. Whatever you are, I hail you, my Lord, as you appear in me. I hail you in me, O Lord of gods, in your form of infinity within myself, and in the shape of bliss within my soul. I, I hail you in me, O Lord of gods, in your form of infinity within myself, and in the shape of bliss within my soul of bliss. I hail you, O Supreme Spirit, who is superior to and master of all. I bow down to that cloudless light shining like the full moon within me, and to that identical form which is free from all uh, predicates and attributes. It is the self risen as light in myself. The soul, Atma, is identical to that blissful soul which I find in myself. With this, chapter 34 comes to an end, and we will again meet for the reading of chapter 35 onwards. Until then, Shiva friends. Thanks to Lord Ram, who, with the help of, with the grace of whom we are able to complete this reading session. Shiva friends.